Hi, everyone, and welcome to Church Online. Thanks for tuning in from wherever you may be watching today. If you've been joining us online for a while and are looking for the next step to get connected to the church, we'd love to help you do that. All you got to do is text Hey Neighbor to 97000 and we'll reach out. In a few minutes, we'll be joining the Worship Center live for a message from Pastor Jared in a brand new series. And I love the name of this series. It's called How to Reopen Your Life. Let's stand and worship together, and I'll be back in a moment to share some upcoming events.
Lord, I find you in the seeking. Lord, I find you in the doubt. And to know you is to love you, and to know so little else. I need you. Oh, how I need you. Oh, how I need you. Oh, how I need you. Lord, I find you in the seeking. Lord, I find you in the doubt. And to know you is to love you, and to know so little else. I need you. Oh, how I need you. Oh, how I need you. Oh, how I need you. Lord, I find you in the morning. Lord, I seek you every day. Let my life be for your glory, woven in your threads of grace. I need you. Oh, how I need you. Oh, how I need you. Oh, how I need you. Light, glorious light, I will go where you shine. Break the dawn, break the sky, make the way bright before me. In your light, I will find all I need is you. Light, glorious light, I will go where you shine. Break the dawn, crack the sky, make the way bright before me. In your light, I will find all I need is you. Oh, how I need 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 you.
Hello, everyone. Thanks again for joining us online. We're so grateful that you have decided to spend some time with us today. Pastor Jared will be taking the stage in the Worship Center in just a moment, but before he does, I'd like to share a few upcoming events with you. First, our next Good Neighbor Day is coming up on Saturday, May 8th. You know we love a good service day around here, and you're invited to join us in loving our neighborhood. There are projects for everyone. Registration is online and open now. Next, our annual golf tournament is coming up on May 21st at the beautiful Rancho Bernardo Inn. Proceeds go towards supporting Alabaster Jar Project and their fight against human trafficking. Register your foursome online today. And on May 13th, we'll be hosting another worship night here at the church. This time, we'll be back indoors in our worship center. Our in-person worship with garden music has been so awesome since we moved back indoors on Sunday mornings. So I highly recommend you come sing with us on May 13th. And finally, as I just mentioned, we are back to meeting indoors here at the church on Sundays. When you're ready, we'd love to see you back at the church for an in-person worship service. Join us next Sunday at 8:30 a.m. or 10 a.m. Bring the whole family. Registration is not required. The church at RB would like to thank each of you who give generously as we meet the physical and spiritual needs of our community. Your financial gifts allow this church to carry out its mission in a powerful way. But giving is very personal too. It's an act of worship that deepens our trust and relationship with God. If you're in a position to give, we'd like to invite you to take the next step in trusting God with your resources to grow in that relationship. Please visit crb.gives to give today. We're going to continue to worship now before we join Pastor Jared in the worship center for the start of a very cool new series, How to Reopen Your Life. Enjoy.
Jesus paid it all to him I owe. Sin had left a crimson stain, he washed it white as snow. My sin had left a crimson stain, he washed it white as snow. Your buried body began to breathe, and out of the silence, the roaring lion declared the grave has no claim on me. There's no claim. Then came the morning that sealed the promise. Your buried body began to breathe, and out of the silence, the roaring lion declared the grave has no claim on me. Jesus, yours is the victory. Hallelujah. Praise the one who set me free. Hallelujah. Death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name. Jesus Christ, my living hope. Jesus Christ, my living hope. God, you are my living
Hey, everybody. Good to see you. Yes. It's good to be in church. We're having some church this morning. It just feels good, doesn't it? It just feels good to be together, the living stones coming together in this moment. I just driving over this morning, and I know it's our third week of being reopened, but man, it just feels good. And I still had that same energy level that I had week one when we opened a couple weeks ago. It was just like it's just like Christmas morning for me. So if I look too excited, it's your fault. It's your problem. It's just I'm just going to be this way, okay? But just good to be with you today. I want to begin a brand new series called How to Reopen Your Life. And the heart behind this series, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. Everywhere you look in society right now, everything is reopening, reemerging. Locally, I know that school, PUSD, kids are going back tomorrow. Yeah, we can cheer that, yeah. In fact, a few of you, that's the only reason you're here is because you made God a promise. If you just get my kids out of the house, I'll go to church, God. I'll do anything. And I get that. Any teachers here? Just any educators? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Awesome. Yes. First off, thank you. But we're with you tomorrow and praying for you. And as school goes back, we're just locking arms with our teachers. And I know for everybody, COVID's had a funk to it. But for you, it's been black belt COVID and a lot of learning and trying to figure this whole thing out. So we're with you tomorrow. School's getting back to normal a little bit. You can go to a Padres game, which is great. You can go to a Padres game at Petco. And not as many Padres fans here as I thought. That's cool. It's a little awkward. You can go to a Chargers game. It's a tough crowd. It's been a rough 13 months. You guys might boo me. I don't know. My name's Jared. Boo. Thank you, Mom. Any Padres players here? I don't know. It'll cost you about $5,000 to go to a game right now, but you can go. For that price, Tatis better not just be playing. He better drive me home. But life, society, restaurants, I lose track of the numbers, 25%, 50% reopening, and you feel it everywhere that you go. And I want to personalize that over the next few weeks and ask that question, how do you not, because you see it everywhere, how do you reopen society? But how do you reopen your life? How do you shake off some of the rust and the dust of the last 13 months and emerge from these days as a more passionate, engaged human being? Because I think the danger is that in the same way a restaurant would open up and say this business model or how this is working at 50% or 25% is not viable, I just need to shut down. I think the danger of these days is that you would reopen your life and you and your heart and your faculties and capacities, you would be at 50% as a human being. And how do you enter in at 110%, having learned some beautiful, valuable lessons in these days, and re-enter and reopen as a more passionate, faithful Christ follower, not as a smashed up, beat up, I can't believe this happened kind of human being. And I say that knowing that emerging or reopening your life, it's different for everybody across the room. It's not the same for you as it is for the person next to you. For some of you, you would say, honestly, Jared, I haven't been that affected by this. And you didn't lose your job. In fact, I talked to a lot of you who say, I actually like my job more now than I did before. Because I'm not sitting around all those people that I have to sit around, that pontificated about the weather all day. For some of you, a dream, or for some of us, a big life plan you had got put on ice, and you would say these 13 months there's been a regression and maybe even a depression in terms of how you engage and enter into your life. It just all feels like a fog still, and I know that it's not the same for everybody, and so I want to be sensitive to that, but at the same time, I do think for us as Christ followers, how we start to put our feet on the ground and be more passionate as human beings, not less, fully engaged, and not just live a life. And there's kind of two things for today. One is, how do you live your faith out in a society that largely, increasingly, does not reflect your values? And second, how do you create your future in the days ahead, not just trying to recreate your past? Because I think we all feel that at a certain level. I want to just get back to X, Y, Z, travel, church, whatever it may be. But how do you create a future that isn't just out of your memory, but is out of your imagination about how can God use me now? How can God do something in me and through me? How can a new song be in my heart now for these days and in this moment? And I really believe this for our church, for you as an individual. Your best days are ahead. And that you can step into the future, not just saying, I want to kind of get back to some things the way they were, but you can actually be used by God and thrive in this moment in time in a way that you never have. And I believe that over you today. And I hope that you believe that over yourself. And I hope that you emerge from the pandemic or whatever you want to call it, a more passionate, engaged human being with life and your gifts and your job and your kids and all the things that God's given you, because if nothing else, you've learned the things that are the most valuable to you. To get where we're going to get over the next few weeks, I want us to be in the book of Daniel, which is a book in the Old Testament. If you have a Bible, you can turn there. If not, that's okay. We're going to put the verses on the screen. But the book of Daniel is one of these books that anybody, you grew up in church and went to vacation Bible school as a kid? Any vacation Bible schoolers? If you're new to church, you're like, what are you talking about? That's a camp in, somewhere. Vacation Bible school, we do it here at the church, but it's a lot of times as a kid, I would act out different parts, David, Goliath, got to be Noah one time in the flood. That was awesome. Hallmark moment for me in my childhood. Got to be Daniel in the lion's den. It was a small Baptist church, so you got to be pretty much anybody you wanted to be at my church. And Daniel in the lion's den, sort of the iconic story, but Daniel's actually sort of a secondary character in the book. The main characters are these guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And a little history on this, especially if you're new to church, there's two major anchor stories of the Old Testament, or the scriptures before Jesus comes. And this is about 600 years before Christ enters into the world, the story that we're going to look at today. And the first big story of the Old Testament is the Exodus story. It's the Prince of Egypt, if you ever saw that movie, the people of God wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. But the second big story, this is what we're going to talk about, is the Babylonian exile. And Babylon, 2,600 years ago, was the world's superpower. And they conquered the people of God. And for 70 years, the people of God were dragged away from their homeland, and they were placed in a city that did not live according to their values. And they're asking that question, how do we live our values out here in Babylon where nothing reflects the life that we previously had? How do we be passionate, engage with our God, our faith now in this moment? And the Babylonians, it was a massive cultural bastion kind of place. It was Babylonian culture was something you aspired to. They ruled the world. It was subjugation through assimilation. What they would do is they would go into a society and they would conquer it, and they would, maybe another way to say it, they would take the best and they would leave the rest. They would take the cultural elites. They would look for whoever had the white-collar jobs, and they would sweep them up and bring them into Babylon, assimilate them into Babylonian society. And the goal was that in time, the culture they'd conquered would just rot out because the people that were leading it were gone. And they would take the best and assimilate them into Babylonian society. Well, the book of Daniel is describing this process where these good Hebrew, teenage boys are now trying to figure out, how do we reopen our lives when everything that was familiar is gone? How do we be passionate about our God and about our faith here? And how do we imagine what God could do with us and through us here, and not just live with the memory of how things used to be? And so there's that tension in the story. If you have a Bible, Daniel chapter 3, we're going to start in verse 4 together. And the big question over today is, how do you live out your values when the world around you is not reflecting your values and you feel that squeeze? How do you be passionate about your faith when your natural trajectory is into apathy and to disregard the things that you value the most? And that's the question for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These are three guys that they're elite. They're the prodigies of Israel, and they are now in Babylonian culture. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are the names that were given to them when they were captured, and they've been given jobs in the Babylonian Empire. They've risen up the ranks. They're successful. They're trying to be faithful to their God. They're trying to measure, okay, how do I live my faith out here in this society and follow and honor the code of Yahweh and our God? And so there's this moment where in Babylon, what would happen when you were in the markets buying apples or whatever it is, music would play, and you were supposed to hit your knee and worship the Babylonian gods. And this was a huge test of faith for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And we'll draw out some application for this in just a moment. It says, the herald loudly proclaimed, verse 4. And that's not a guy named Harold or Harry. That's somebody would come to the edge of town and say, hey, time to take a knee. And they would play music with this. Nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. So you get a picture here. It's a pluralistic society. It's a society in Babylon, not that different than ours. You have people from every tribe, nation, tongue, ethnicity, religious background trying to coexist in the same space. And here they are in the market, and in Babylon, what they would do is they would play this music, and it didn't matter what your background was, you were supposed to hit a knee. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, the herald would proclaim, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, the steel guitar, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar, who was the emperor, has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. It's a parenting strategy. You can try that one too. Do what I say, or you'll be thrown into a blazing furnace. So this was what they said to do. Now, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we'll pick up their story in just a moment. We're going to look at them for the next couple of weeks. They are in this moment going, okay, we have our values of our God that we grew up with, and so their whole life they would go to temple, they would go to synagogue, they would pray their prayers, they would cite their scriptures, they would have the Torah, the first 5 books memorized. All this had been washed over them their whole life. But here they are, they've been snatched up, plopped into Babylon. Harp, lyre, music, xylophone, whatever you want to call it, plays. Everybody around them hits a knee, bowing to the Babylonian gods. And you got to like these guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, because in this moment they're going, not us. And the music plays. Well, the astrologers, who were kind of the lead deities of Babylon, see this, and they're like, What's with those three? And so they did what astrologers do, I guess. They ratted them out. They took the three to King Nebuchadnezzar and said this, verse 12, "But there are some Jews, Hebrews from Israel, whom you have set apart or set over the affairs of the province of Babylon." So they had jobs, really good jobs in Babylon. And now they're not only about to lose their jobs, they're about to lose their life because they won't bow. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which I love those names, who paid no attention to you, your majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold that you have set up. Now, what does this story have anything to do with your life and reopening your life? We'll get there in just a second. But the first question is, what are they bowing to? It's a little fuzzy. Most of the times in the Old Testament, it's, well, there's Baal or there's a golden calf. That's not the case here. It's if you read the commentators on this, verse 14, the image of gold, it's not King Nebuchadnezzar. Essentially, what they're being asked to worship is Babylonian ideals and philosophy. It's Babylon itself, this cultural bastion. You aspire to it, a way of life, high society. And in a culture like this, where everybody's coming from different backgrounds, different tribes, different tongues, how Nebuchadnezzar would keep the peace is he would essentially privatize religion. And he would say, look, wherever you're from, whatever your background is, that's fine. Worship your gods, speak your language, do your thing in private. But when you're in public and you hear the music play, you better hit a knee. And that was how you kept the peace in Babylon. And essentially what he's saying to these three guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is he's saying, look, I'm not telling you to worship Babylon instead of your God, Yahweh. I'm telling you to worship Babylon in addition to your God. And he's essentially, the strategy to keep the peace in a society where everybody has a different thought process and everybody thinks we have absolute truth and our God's the God and this is the way and this is how you're supposed to do it. The way he keeps the peace is he says, fine, you do that in private, but when you're in public and you hear the music play, you better look like everybody else. And everybody did look like everybody else, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego draw a line and said, not so with us. Now, how this works in our society, here's essentially where the squeeze is for you. Culture essentially says to you every single day, you're raising your kids in a society like this, that says to you, look, worship your God on Sunday, that's fine. Sing your songs, pray your prayers, read your sacred book, raise your kids with Christian ethics, values. That's all fine and good. You do that in private, but when you are in public, you better look like everybody else. You feel that squeeze every single day, don't you? You hear the music playing all the time. Look, have your ethics, have your values, have your faith, all that's fine and good. But increasingly, when you are in public, when you are in your office, when you're at the ball field, when you're wherever it is that you go, you better conform to the image that is in front of you. You better hit a knee and you better look like everybody else. You feel that squeeze constantly. And over time, it will force your faith to be apathetic. It will force you to not care about the things that matter the most to you. How this plays out for you, in your world, you go to church on Sunday. You sing songs, you read the scriptures, but on Monday you go to work, and there's that squeeze, isn't it? Hey, look, that's fine. You went to church yesterday, that's great. But when you're in this office, and we start joking about people, you better joke about people the same way we joke about people. That's fine. You went to church on Sunday, you sing songs, you read the scriptures, maybe you got up on Monday and had a quiet time because you're extra spiritual. You do that in your life, that's fine and good, but when you're in this office, you better check all that at the door, because here we skirt the edges of legality for the sake of profits, and we have our own version of ethics, and you better take a knee because the music's playing. and you feel that squeeze constantly. Look, raise your kids with values and ethics. Teach them the 10 Commandments. That's all fine and good. Even teach them some of the Sermon on the Mount. That's probably beneficial somewhere along the way. But when you are by the pool with the other moms and dads, you better raise your kids like everybody else. Your kids better look like everybody else. And part of the question is, how do you differentiate yourself in a society that's constantly squeezing you, saying this is what you are supposed to look like and this is what you're supposed to do? And you feel that constantly. That rub is always there. Might this be a relevant story for us in 2021? Of course. Their story is our story. In our society, if we get really crystal clear, the golden images that are around you all the time are the gods of money, sex, and power. And our society says to you and to me, hey, look, that's all fine and good. Worship your God, sing your songs, have Easter celebrations, announce resurrection, that's fine. But when you are in public, you better worship money, sex, and power like everybody else. And we're not telling you not to worship your God. We're just saying, in addition to worshiping your God, your main gods better be the God of Babylon all around you of money, sex, and power. Take a knee. Look and live like everybody else. And over time, what happens? Subjugation through assimilation. You start to lose the value, the faith, the passion of what you hold dearest to you. Listen, the greatest threat to Christianity in our culture, in our society, it is not atheism, it's apathy. It's not the atheism of the world around you. It's apathy of Christians in our culture, in our society, who over time have been so squeezed that they lose their passion for their faith. They lose the thing. Because if you can privatize something, if you say, hey, look, that's just between you and God, and you make it just this is just a me and God thing, this is just a me and God thing, it's not really a public thing. If you can make something private, in time you can make it passive, can't you? Where the thing that is the most central, the faith of, in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's case, the faith of the old country, the way things used to be, will be squeezed out, and you will just start to look like everybody else in time. And part of the question for you as you raise kids, part of the question for you in your own life, in your office is, how do I differentiate myself and put my foot down and not take a knee like everybody else and not look like everybody else? How do I live a faith, not of apathy and privacy, but how do I live a faith that's public and passionate, where my faith is being demonstrated? How does that work? What does that look like? And we're going to get there in some practical ways, because there's a lot of ways to take that. Go, well, I'm just going to go with a bullhorn down to Petco today and scream at people. That's one option. That's public and that's passionate. But the other side of that is what we're going to see in just a moment from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, of how they live out and defend the absolute truth that they hold to and they cling dearly to. And part of this is they know what God has said to them through the prophet Jeremiah about how to live in Babylon. And I love this, Jeremiah 29, verse 6, 7, and 8. If you have a Bible, you can turn there. If not, I'm going to put these on the screen. But Jeremiah 29 says this. God has said, I'm saying this, if you read the full context, to the exiles, those of you that are being dragged off from Jerusalem to Babylon. He says, you're going to be there for 70 years. Get comfortable. It's going to be a little while. And you're going to be living in a culture and a society where everywhere you look around you, religion is a private thing. It's a passive thing. It's not something in public you are to talk about. It's not something you're supposed to demonstrate. And if anybody catches a whiff of it, they're going to play the music and tell you to hit a knee. And how do you live your faith out there is what God's concerned with in the book of Jeremiah. When you get there, you got some options. One option is you sit by the river of Babylon and you just cry about it and go, I just want things to be the way they used to be. That's one option. Another option is you can scream at everybody and get yourself thrown in the blazing furnace. Well, that's not a great option either. Another option is what God tells them to do. He says, when you get there, he says, I want you to build houses and settle down, which is not what they were expecting. It's like, whoa, plant gardens and eat what they produce. And then he says this, I want you to marry and have sons and daughters, raise kids there, go to school there. Start businesses there. Flourish there. Seek flourishing for yourselves. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. And you got men about to be dragged off to Babylon, and they're like, I don't want to go to Babylon. And he's like, no, you're going to go be a grandpa in Babylon. I know you're only 15 now, but you're going to be a grandpa one day. And God blesses you, and he's saying, I'm with you in that. So that they too may have sons and daughters, increase in number there, do not decrease. Also, and I love this, he says, seek the peace and the prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Seek the peace and the prosperity of a place that does not look the way you want it to look. And he says this, pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. That's probably not the message they wanted to hear. God, we want you to defeat Babylon and make it look the way we want it to look. He says, no, I want you to get there, and when you encounter somebody who does not have your values, passionately live out your faith by praying for them and seeking their prosperity, because if they prosper, Babylon prospers, you too are going to prosper. And he says, you go there, and he says, I want you to live this way. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to them. Seek the peace and the prosperity of the city around you. I want you to go, and I want you to be for Babylon. And as a church, as followers of Christ, how you take that and live that out in a society, in a world that, as you look around, you go, whoa, the music I hear on the radio, the words my coworkers say, the things that my single friends do on the weekends, the way that dating works if you're single, nothing in my culture seems to reflect the values that I was raised with, that I hold dear to, that I pray to, the God that I pray to. It seems like everywhere I look, Babylon, Babylon, Babylon. And we live this out by saying, you know what? I want to seek the good of those whose values are different than mine. And instead of screaming at them about their bad values, I want to pray for them. I want to seek the peace and the prosperity of them. Instead of, folding my arms and being surprised when non-Christians act like non-Christians. Has that ever been shocking to you? I can't believe she said those words. It's like, well, she doesn't have Ephesians in her heart as say no unwholesome words that aren't edifying. Of course, people in our culture don't act like they follow Jesus because they don't follow Jesus. And instead of fighting that, say, I'm going to seek the peace and the prosperity of those who are around me, and I'm going to be for people in my city whose businesses don't reflect my values. I'm going to be for people in my city who live out values that are different than my values. I'm going to be for school systems that don't always advocate for the things I care about. I'm going to pray for my leaders. I'm going to pray for the people around me, whether they go to the same church or have the same beliefs or not, because if they prosper, I will prosper. And as a church, it's why we have good neighbor everywhere. It's why we talk about serving our city, seeking the good of our city, not because our city reflects our values constantly, but because we believe if it prospers, we too will prosper. And we anchor ourselves in Babylon and say, but we still are going to be passionate about our faith here. And we're going to live this out. And we're going to seek the good of those who are around us. You got another option. There's people that get to Babylon, and I love this. This is what the psalmist says. Psalm 137. There's those that, in a lot of the Psalms were written in Babylon. By the rivers of Babylon we sat and we wept when we remembered Zion. So you got some options. You can get to Babylon and fold your arms and sit on the riverbank and go, I just want to go home. Do you know anybody like that? I just want things to be the way they used to be. And history or the present never rewards those who refuse to engage and just try to get things to go back to the way they were. History rewards, the present rewards those who say, I'm going to roll up my sleeves. I'm going to live not out of memory, but out of imagination about how God can use me and what God can do in me and through me in this moment. Because I believe God's with me here as much as he has ever been. I'm going to seek the good. I'm going to be for Rancho Bernardo. I'm going to be for my neighbors. I'm going to be for people around me no matter what. And instead of wanting things to go back to the way they were, I'm going to be fully engaged with things the way that they are. And so they roll up their sleeves, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I love these guys. And they're passionate about their faith. But notice in the next part of the story, and we're going to read the end of the story next week, where they actually get thrown in the furnace. So make sure you come back for that one. Like, what happens to them? Surely, the king lets them off, and King Nebuchadnezzar becomes a Christian and starts preaching Easter services. No, that's not what happens. It does have a really good outcome. We'll see it next week. But they probably were a little surprised that it went the way it did. It says Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they're dragged in front of King Nebuchadnezzar. And they said to him, I love this, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. So his question is, why aren't you taking a knee? That's how I keep the peace in Babylon. I need you to look like everybody else. I need you to be apathetic about your faith. And they're like, You picked the wrong guys. If we're thrown into a blazing furnace, they said, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, Nebuchadnezzar, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up. They have some options here. They could, come into King Nebuchadnezzar's place and, start throwing stuff and go, what kind of name is Nebuchadnezzar anyway? I mean, that's weird. I mean, forgive me if your name's Nebuchadnezzar. They could say, well, why'd you give us these ridiculous Babylonian names and you worship weird stuff and we don't like they've got some options here. But notice what they do. I love it. They're firm in their faith and they say, look, here's the deal. We are not going to bow, but we're also not going to argue about it with you. And we're not going to sit here and scream at you about our way that we want to live and what we want to do. We're not here to argue with you about it. We're just going to practice our faith and trust our God because we believe our God is greater than you, Nebuchadnezzar. And that's how we're going to live. And they believe in this moment, absolute truth is on their side. They believe their God is the God. The God of Israel is the God of all nations. And although Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar have the scepter and the sword in this moment, in their mind, they know that the God of history, nations come and go, economies come and go, and their God is ultimately going to write the history books of how things are said and done. And so they're going, we don't really need to argue with you, Nebuchadnezzar. We have absolute truth in this moment. And I love this. They're demonstrating something for us 2,600 years later. The best way to defend absolute truth is not to scream about it, it's to practice it and it's to live it out. And it's to demonstrate a lifestyle of congruence to the truth that you believe. And in this moment, and I'm all for arguments. I believe they're biblical. You read through Mars Hill and debating and discussing, all that's fine and good. But the power is not in the argument. The power is in the practice of I'm going to be faithful to my God no matter what. And I'm going to let the chips fall where they may. And when that moment comes where the music plays and I feel squeezed, instead of screaming about the thing that I care about, I'm going to practice the thing I care about, and I'm going to live it out. And I'm going to be the kind of person publicly, passionately, that's faithful to my God. But I'm going to be faithful to my God, Nebuchadnezzar, not by telling you what you should do or why, but by just practicing my faith and being passionate about my faith. You say, well, how does that work? I'll give you an example. A couple of weeks ago, I took my two oldest sons, Dane and Hayden, 9 and 7, fishing at Lake Dixon out in Escondido Vista-ish area. And while we were there, we were on this pier, and if you've ever been there before, you kind of know they stock the lake, and it's kind of nice because all these fish are just like right there, and you just feel like it's kind of like cheating, to be honest with you. And we're on this pier fishing, and the dock was pretty packed of people. And if you've ever been fishing before, any fishermen or women here, I don't mean that in a Christian sense. I know there's a lot of Bible verses around that, which that's fine too. But we're there fishing, and if you've been fishing before, you know a lot of times when you're around other people that are fishing, fishermen can use fisherman language. And while we're on this pier, Me, Dane, Hayden, and a friend of ours who's with us, we're there, and my boys keep hearing words they've never heard before. And they kept coming over to me going, Dad, what does this word mean? And I won't tell you the words because we're in church, but there's that moment as a parent, and this is the question: what do you do when you, or maybe this is where you're more vulnerable, or where you're a little more angry, when your children are exposed to values that do not reflect your values, exposed to society, exposed to Babylon? And there's 1,000 ways that this plays itself out, isn't it? What do you do in that moment? You've got some options. One is you can scream at the people who are living out their own values or their own sort of way of life. That's option one. You can, have you ever done the thing where you're mad that somebody's doing something and living, just, you're surprised they're acting that way, and as a way to get them to stop, you just mirror their bad behavior? So that's one option. You can cuss at people about their cussing. You ever done that thing where somebody, does something to you in traffic? They're like, I can't believe he, flicked me off. And so what do you do in response? You give them a cross sign. That's one way. Everybody's mad, so I'm going to get just as mad. I'm going to mirror the behavior. That's one option. Or the other option, and my friend who was with us pulls me and Dane and Hayden aside, and we're just kind of talking about this for a moment, and he says, look, just because you're hearing these words doesn't mean you have to use these words when you're at home. And the response is you model and you live out in your own faith an environment, a way of life that mirrors the scriptures, Ephesians 4, that says no unwholesome words will proceed from my mouth. We're going to model that, and we're going to live that out. And while we're here on this dock, when one of these guys catches a fish that's bigger than anything we're catching, because it wasn't anything that day, we're going to cheer them on, we're going to celebrate them, and we're going to be happy. And if they prosper, we too prosper. We're going to be the kind of people that can hold our faith intact without having to scream at somebody else or get frustrated at somebody else. How do you live in a world? That story is going to get played out tomorrow, the next day, the next day, the next day, the next day. And be passionate about your faith, absolute truth, by practicing your faith. The quality of your faith is not determined by how loud your argument it is. The quality of your faith is determined by how passionate you are in your commitments and your values. And be the kind of person that says, you know what, around me, as I try to find footing in the new world, as I try to find footing in life, it seems like I'm a contrarian. All my values are the antithesis, and they're conflicting with the world around me, but I'm going to hold dear to these things. And as you create your future, don't just sit by the river of Babylon going, I want things to be the way they were, and live in memory, but be a person of imagination saying, how can God use me here? How can me being passionate about my faith here in this moment, how can me holding my values tight? I don't know what the last 13 months have been like for you, but I would imagine, and everybody I talk to, you have learned some things about yourself, and you probably have learned the things that matter the most to you. And as those have bubbled to the surface, faith, God, raising my kids with that faith, being the kind of person that practices that faith, being the kind of person who has friends around me, being the kind of person that values my family, that your values have surfaced. You say, you know what, as I imagine my future, I'm going to carry these values with me, and I'm going to live these values out. I'm going to be the kind of person that practices my faith over and over again. And that's how we're passionate about our faith. We live out those values. Nebuchadnezzar, I'm not bowing, but I'm not screaming about it either. I'm just going to be faithful to my God. And I want that for you. I want that for our church. Part of the way that we do that, we seek the good of the city. We seek the good of our neighbors. We pray for them. We believe that if this place prospers, we too will prosper. and we engage and we imagine a better future for ourselves and for our neighborhood and for our city. And we don't just pray that, we want to be a part of that solution. Let's pray together today. God, we thank you that we come into this moment knowing that for many, we've been rattled. It feels like things change so fast, and we're trying to find our footing. And I pray for somebody who maybe within the sound of my voice, they feel like life is just upside down. And I pray, Spirit of God, would they know in this moment that although the King plays the harp and the music is loud, would they know in the moments they're squeezed the most, maybe in terms of relationships or finances, raising kids, would they see clearer than ever what matters the most? And would they be congruent to it? Would they adhere to it? Would they practice it? Would they live it out? Would we be just as passionate about praying as we are telling people we have a right to pray? Would we be just as passionate about living our faith out as we are about any argument that we want to get in? God, we know that everybody around us is passionate about something. Would we be passionate about the right things? And would we live out the faith, the story, that nations come and go, economies come and go, but our God is the God. And would that be so deep in us that we never fear the blazing furnace, we never fear the consequence, we just step up and step into moment after moment, chasing after the God of history, knowing that he is on our side. And we thank you for that, God. Even when the consequences appear to be grave, we know that you are always with us. And we know even more than that, God, you reward the faithfulness of your sons and your daughters and your saints. We thank you for that. It's in Jesus' name that we pray, and all of God's children said, amen. Let's worship together.
There's a grace when the heart is under fire, another way when the walls are closing in. And when I look at the space between where I used to be and this reckoning, oh, I know I will never be alone. There was another in the fire, standing next to me. There was another in the waters, holding back the seas. And should I ever need reminding of how I've been set free, there is a cross that bears the burden, where another died for me. There is another in the fire. Dead beneath the waters, I'm no longer a slave to my sin anymore. And should I fall in the space between what remains of me and this reckoning, either way I won't bow to the things of this world. Set me free. There is a grave is no other name but the name that is Jesus. He who was and still is and will be through it all. So come with me in the space between all the things unseen and this reckoning. Oh, I know I will never be alone. Oh, we know. Yes, I know I will never be alone. There'll be another in the fire, standing next to me. There'll be another in the waters, holding back the seas. And should I ever need reminding how good you've been to me, I'll count the joy come every battle, 'cause I know that's where you'll be. I can see the light in the darkness as the darkness bows to him. I can hear the roar in the heavens as the space between wears thin. I can feel the ground shake beneath us as the prison walls cave in. Oh, nothing stands between us. Nothing stands between us.
Be another in the fight, standing next to me. Be another in the water, holding back the seas. And should I ever need reminding how good you've been to me,
I'll count the joy come every battle, 'cause I know that's where you'll be. There'll be another in the fire, standing next to me. There'll be another in the waters, holding back the seas. And should I ever need reminding how good you've been to me, I'll count the joy come every battle, 'cause I know that's where you'll be. I'll count the joy come every battle, 'cause I know that's where you'll be. I'll count the joy come every battle, 'cause I know that's where you'll be. I'll count the joy come every battle, 'cause I know that's where you'll be.
For the past 12 years, we've served alongside Godwin Elijah and Meaningful Life International, an organization in Ghana that works to bring healthcare and clean water to rural communities. Meeting physical needs opens the door to share the good news of Jesus. And 3 years ago, we partnered with them to build a clean water well and help bring transformation to a village. The pandemic has impacted us all, but it affects those living in poverty even more. The rural poor have limited access to resources like vaccines, food, and healthcare.
This lockdown made it difficult for people to even go back to work and go back to their farms. Beyond just the virus killing them, they were also being killed by fear and hunger, because some of them just even didn't have food to feed their families.
Once again, we partnered with Godwin and spearheaded a relief project providing essential resources to a village in Ghana.
Here we are today in the village of Dedikope to do what we call the Emergency COVID Relief Project. Bags of rice, oil, face masks, hand sanitizers, and we are going to distribute this to over 100 families.
He was the assembly member. He shows up at the program with 3 of his guys, and he goes like, "This is the kind of church I want to be with." That for me was an endorsement of Jesus. Just like he probably fed the 5,000 with the 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes, he's doing it today through the partnership with the church at Rancho Bernardo. Thank you from Ghana. Thank you for the village of the Dukope. We say that to the glory of God.